Welcome to Translano. Hey, there. I'm so glad you're here. This is a space where we celebrate self-expression, individuality, and empowerment. I used to think personal identity was something you discovered once, like finding a label at the bottom of a drawer and finally knowing where it belonged. I thought there would be a single moment where everything clicked and stayed clicked. But the older I got, the more I realized identity doesn't arrive like a package with clear instructions. It shows up like weather, subtle shifts, pressure changes you don't notice until you're already standing in different air. And for me, one of the earliest changes in that air had nothing to do with sex or spectacle or trying to shock anyone. It had to do with softness, and the strange relief I felt the first time I let myself be seen, by myself, as gentle. When I was a kid, I learned the rules before I learned the reasons. Boys were supposed to be loud when they were excited, tough when they were hurt, and uninterested in anything that looked delicate. I didn't grow up in a house that was cruel on purpose, but it was a house where jokes did a lot of enforcing. People rarely said, "You can't do that," directly. They laughed first. They raised an eyebrow. They asked questions that weren't really questions. And in a family like mine, you learned quickly that being laughed at wasn't just embarrassing, it was a kind of warning. I was the quiet kid. Not the mysterious kind of quiet, just the kind that spent a lot of time listening and trying to figure out what everyone else already seemed to know. I liked art projects. I liked the careful way my mom folded laundry, the way fabric could be smoothed into order. I liked the smell of clean cotton and the comfort of things that fit right. I also liked my dad, and I wanted him to be proud of me, which meant I paid close attention to what made him smile. Sports made him smile. Man-up jokes made him smile. The kind of confidence that takes up space made him smile. I tried to copy those things the way kids copy words in a new language, not understanding why the sentence felt wrong in my mouth. The first time I tried on something feminine, it wasn't a dramatic rebellion. It was an accident made of curiosity and boredom. I was home alone, maybe 9 or 10, and I wandered into my parents' room the way kids do when the rest of the house feels too big and quiet. There was a drawer slightly open, and inside were soft things, colors that weren't the usual blues and grays of my clothes. I remember picking up a light shirt, holding it against my arms. The fabric felt different, like it had permission to be kind. I don't even know what I expected when I pulled it over my head. I just remember looking at myself and feeling, for a few seconds, like my body wasn't a problem I had to solve. That moment didn't come with a speech in my head. It didn't announce a destiny. It was simpler than that. It was relief. And then, immediately after, fear, because I'd already learned that relief was suspicious if it came from the wrong place. I took it off quickly, folded it back the way I found it, and stood there in my own room afterward as if I needed to prove to the air that nothing had happened. But something had happened, because from that day on I knew there was a version of me that felt more honest than the one I performed in public. I didn't have vocabulary for it, so I tried to file it under a secret, and I tried to make the file small. At school, I learned to laugh when other kids laughed at boys who seemed too pretty or too soft, even though the laughter tasted like metal. I learned to keep my hands still. I learned to lower my voice when I spoke. I learned to anticipate which parts of myself would be questioned and hide them before anyone else could. In middle school, my body started changing in ways I didn't ask for, and the pressure to be a real guy increased like someone turning a dial. I watched other boys get praised for aggression, for conquest, for their ability to act like nothing hurt them. I watched the way tenderness was treated like a weakness unless it was directed toward a girlfriend. I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't even know what kind of person I wanted to hold hands with. I just knew that the world seemed to hand out instructions to everyone else, and mine kept smudging into unreadable ink. I started using the internet the way some people use a diary they can't bear to write in their own handwriting. Late at night, when the house was asleep, I'd search phrases that felt like confession. I found communities of people who dressed in ways that didn't match expectations. Some of them called it crossdressing. Some of them called it gender expression. Some of them didn't call it anything, they just posted pictures and said, in different words, "This is me." I remember how stunned I was by the ordinariness of it. Not the content, just the tone. People weren't always making it into a joke or a dare. They were simply existing. I also found the ugliness that comes with visibility. Comment sections that treated femininity in boys like an invitation to cruelty. Jokes that reduced people to objects. Words that hit like stones. That part scared me more than I want to admit. It taught me that being seen could be dangerous. But it also taught me something else. If strangers could hate someone for being soft, then softness must have power. People don't try to crush things that don't matter. In high school, I became two versions of myself, the one who did what was expected, and the one who waited patiently in the background like a friend I kept canceling on. The expected version was fine. He got decent grades. He wore the right clothes. He didn't cause trouble. He learned to smile at jokes that made him flinch. He learned to answer questions about girls with vague shrugs so nobody looked too closely. The other version of me, quiet, feminine, curious, came out when I was alone. I'd experiment with clothes in private, sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes long enough to forget time. I'd take a photo and delete it. Take another and delete it. I wasn't trying to become someone else. I was trying to witness myself without punishment. Around that time, mental health became part of the story, even though I didn't recognize it at first. I thought the constant tension was just what adolescence felt like. I thought everyone lived with a knot in their chest, always bracing for exposure. But there were nights when I couldn't sleep because my mind kept replaying every moment of the day, scanning for mistakes, imagining what would happen if anyone knew. I became hyper-aware of how I walked, how I sat, how I laughed. It was exhausting, and the exhaustion made me irritable, and then I felt guilty for being irritable, and the guilt became its own loop. I didn't have a dramatic breakdown, but I did have a quiet one, the kind where you start avoiding mirrors, not because you hate yourself, but because you don't know what you're supposed to see. I remember standing in the bathroom one morning, staring at my face, and thinking, I am living like I'm in trouble, but nobody has even accused me of anything. That thought scared me because it hinted at a bigger truth. I was policing myself more harshly than anyone else ever had. The first person I talked to about any of it wasn't a therapist. It was a friend I trusted because they were kind in a way that didn't require performance. We were sitting in a parked car after school, rain tapping the windshield, the world muted and gray, and I said something small, like, "Do you ever feel like you're pretending?" My friend didn't laugh. They didn't demand details I wasn't ready to give. They just said, "Yeah, but I don't think you have to pretend with me." That sentence didn't solve my life, but it widened it. It made space. I started to imagine a future where I didn't have to split myself into acceptable and secret. But imagining wasn't the same as doing, and fear still had a loud voice. My family wasn't violently intolerant, but they were the kind of tolerant that came with conditions. They could accept things as long as those things stayed abstract, far away, not attached to someone they knew. And I was someone they knew. College was the first place I had enough distance to breathe. Not because everyone was automatically accepting, but because I wasn't trapped in the same social aquarium I'd grown up in. There were new people, new norms, and the most important part, I could choose who I spent time with. I started experimenting with presentation more openly, but still carefully. I'd wear something slightly more fitted. I'd let my hair grow. I'd take better care of my skin. I'd allow myself to be a little pretty, in small doses, like someone learning to taste a food they'd been told was forbidden. Online, I became confident in a way that surprised me. I posted photos sometimes, nothing provocative, just me in outfits that made me feel like myself. I learned how to coordinate colors, how to find silhouettes that felt right. I learned that femininity wasn't a costume I put on to become a different person, it was a language I could speak to express parts of myself I'd been translating poorly for years. People were kind more often than they were cruel, and each kind comment felt like a stitch holding something together inside me. Still, confidence online didn't translate cleanly into confidence in person. In person, you can see someone's hesitation. You can hear the change in their voice when they're trying to decide whether they're safe with you. You can't log off from a room. And I built so much of my survival around reading rooms that my nervous system treated every social interaction like a test. By the time I started openly identifying as a femboy with a few friends, using the term because it felt honest and because I liked the way it reclaimed softness without apology, I thought I'd already faced the hardest part. I thought the hardest part was allowing myself to exist. I didn't yet understand that being yourself privately is one kind of courage, and being yourself while asking for love is another. Dating men wasn't a sudden pivot for me so much as a gradual admission. If I'm honest, I spent years trying to force myself into the simplest explanation: I'm just like everyone else, I'm just late, I'm just confused. But the feelings didn't go away because I ignored them. They waited. The more I let myself present femininely, the more I had to confront what I wanted emotionally, not just aesthetically. I wanted tenderness. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be chosen in daylight, not in the shadows where people put things they're ashamed of. The first time I agreed to go to a party while dressed the way I actually liked was a bigger deal than I let on. It wasn't extreme, just a soft top, fitted jeans, subtle makeup, and the kind of careful effort that looks casual only if you don't understand how much courage it takes to walk outside wearing something you've been taught to fear. A mutual friend invited me, promised it was a chill group, said, "You'll be fine, everyone there is normal." Normal is a word people use when they mean, please don't make me defend you. But I went anyway because I was tired of living like my life needed permission. The house was crowded, warm with too many bodies and too much music, and I felt the old reflex kick in: scan the room, locate exits, measure risk. People glanced at me and looked away. A few smiled. Someone complimented my eyeliner. I breathed through it, told myself I could leave at any time, that I wasn't trapped. And then I saw Ethan. He looked like the kind of guy I used to assume would be dangerous to me. Not because he had done anything, but because he fit the archetype that had policed me my whole life: tall, athletic, hoodie and sneakers, relaxed posture that reads as confidence. He was laughing with a group of guys near the kitchen, holding a drink, the kind of laugh that takes up space. He looked, in that moment, like a person who had never once had to rehearse how to be seen. I didn't plan to talk to him. I wasn't there to prove anything. I was just trying to exist without flinching. But my friend, the one who had invited me, pulled me toward the kitchen to say hi to people, and suddenly I was in the orbit of Ethan's group. Ethan's eyes landed on me, and I watched something flicker across his face: interest, maybe, the automatic kind that happens before thought catches up. He smiled at me the way a guy smiles at a girl he thinks is cute, quick, instinctive. "Hey," he said, and his voice was casual, like he expected the world to be simple. "Hey," I said back, and my own voice sounded smaller than it had online, like it was remembering old rules. My friend introduced us. "This is Kai," they said. No extra explanation, no warning label, just my name. Ethan held out his hand. "Ethan," he said. I shook it, and his grip softened halfway through, as if he realized something and didn't know what to do with it. He looked at my face again, more carefully this time, and I could see the moment his brain tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he'd assumed. "Wait," he said, and then stopped, like he didn't want to be rude. I didn't rescue him. That was new for me. Old me would have rushed to make him comfortable, would have laughed it off, would have translated myself into something easier. But I'd promised myself I wouldn't do that anymore, at least not automatically. I just stood there and let the silence be his to manage. My friend, sensing the awkwardness, added gently, "Kai's a guy." Ethan blinked. The color rose in his face so fast it was almost boyish. He glanced away, then back, like he was checking whether this was a prank. "Oh," he said, and the single syllable contained an entire collapse of certainty. He let go of my hand as if he'd held it too long. "Oh. Sorry, Dot. It's okay," I said, because I wasn't trying to punish him. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. He nodded too quickly. Yeah, cool. Yeah. He took a step back, almost tripping over his own feet. "Nice to meet you, Kai." And then he did something that surprised me: he left. Not in a dramatic stomp, not with a slur, not with cruelty. He just peeled away from the group, muttered something to one of his friends, and disappeared down the hallway like he needed air. For a few seconds, the old shame tried to bloom in my chest. It whispered, "See? This is why you hide. This is why you don't make things complicated." But my friend touched my arm and said quietly, "That's his stuff, not yours." I wanted to believe them, and I tried. Still, the rest of the night felt slightly out of focus, as if that interaction had tilted the room. I didn't go looking for Ethan. I'd learned not to chase people who ran from me. That lesson had cost me enough already. I stayed, talked to others, laughed where laughter felt real, and when the party began to thin out, I decided to leave. As I stepped onto the porch to get some air before calling a ride, I found Ethan sitting on the steps alone, elbows on his knees, staring at the street like it might offer answers. He looked up when the door creaked. The porch light caught his face in a way that made him look younger than I'd assumed. His expression wasn't hard. It was confused. And there was something else too, embarrassment, yes, but also a kind of self-directed frustration, like he was angry at himself for not being better prepared to be human. "Hey," he said, quieter than before. "Hey," I replied, and I kept my voice neutral. I didn't want to soothe him. I didn't want to shame him. I wanted to see what he would do when I didn't manage his discomfort for him. He rubbed his palms on his jeans. "I think I was rude in there." "You were surprised," I said. "Surprise happens." He nodded, but his jaw tightened. "Still." I made it weird. "It was already weird," I said, and then I surprised myself by adding, "not because of me. Just, the situation." He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. "Yeah." There was a pause, and in that pause I could feel the tension of an ethical choice. I could make this easier by shrinking, by joking, by telling him it didn't matter. Or I could let it matter without turning it into drama. I chose the second. Ethan stared at the street again. "Can I ask you something without you thinking I'm a jerk?" "You can ask," I said. "I'll tell you if it's jerky." A small laugh escaped him, more relief than humor. Then he looked at me, really looked, and said, "So, are you, like, transitioning?" "No," I said. "I'm not a woman. I'm a guy who likes presenting feminine sometimes. That's the simplest version." He nodded slowly, absorbing it. "So you're a femboy?" "Yeah." He swallowed. "Okay." I could see his mind working, trying to find the correct drawer to put me in so the world would make sense again. And I recognized that impulse because I'd done it too, trying to label myself into safety. He said, "I thought you were a girl. And then I found out you weren't." And he stopped, his face tightening with something that looked like panic. I don't know what that means about me. There it was. Not attraction. Not me. Him. The meaning of him. I sat down a step away, not too close. "What do you think it means?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. I'm straight. I've always been straight." He said it like he was reciting a pledge. I didn't argue. I'd learned that people cling to labels when they're drowning, and you don't rip flotation devices away just to prove a point. "Okay," I said carefully. "You can be straight and still have complicated feelings. Or you can realize you're not as straight as you thought. Or you can decide you don't want to deal with it. Those are options." He stared at his hands. I can't stop thinking about you. And that sounds insane to say out loud. My heart kicked hard in my chest, not because it was romantic in a movie way, but because it was real. There was risk in what he'd just admitted. There was also danger, the kind that comes when someone is drawn to you but ashamed of it. I said, "Ethan, I need to ask you something too." "Yeah," he said quickly. "Are you talking to me because you're curious about me?" I asked, "or because you want me to help you not feel guilty?" His face flushed again, but he didn't get defensive. He looked like the question landed exactly where it needed to. "I don't want to use you," he said. And then, more quietly, but I think I might, if I'm not careful. I'm not good at this. That honesty pulled something open in me. It didn't solve the problem, but it made me trust him a fraction more. Still, trust isn't something you hand out because someone confesses. Trust is something you build with boundaries. I told him the truth. I'm new to dating men, I said. Or, trying to. I've been confident online, but in person I'm still learning how to be brave. And I'm not doing secret stuff. I'm not doing hidden stuff. I'm not doing only when no one's looking. He blinked, and I could see him flinch at the implications. I wasn't, he started. I'm not accusing you, I said. I'm telling you what I require. Because I've done the thing where I accept crumbs just to feel chosen. And it messed me up. He stared at me for a long time. The party sounds muffled behind the door, laughter drifting out like another world. Finally he said, so what do you want from me? I could have said, I want you to pick me. I want you to be brave. I want you to be sure. But those wants, spoken too early, become pressure. And pressure makes people lie. So I said, I want you to be honest. Even if the honesty is, I can't do this. And I want you to think about whether you can treat me like a person in the daytime. His throat bobbed. I can treat you like a person, he said, and there was a wounded pride in it, like he couldn't believe he needed to say it. That's not what I meant, I said gently. I mean publicly. I mean around your friends. I mean without you acting like you're doing something wrong. He looked down again, and the confidence he wore indoors seemed to slip off his shoulders. My friends can be idiots, he admitted. And my dad would lose his mind. There it was again, consequences, real ones. Not just feelings. Family. Social pressure. The cost of deviating from the script. I nodded. Yeah, and my family isn't exactly throwing a parade either. So I get it. But I'm not signing up to be someone's secret experiment. He winced at the word experiment. I don't want you to be that, he said. I just don't know what I am if I'm this. The way he said this wasn't about me being a guy in makeup. It was about him losing the armor he'd built out of certainty. I remembered what it was like to feel that armor crack, and how terrifying it was to imagine standing in the world without it. I said, sometimes labels are helpful. Sometimes they're just protection. If a straight is the only way you know how to feel safe, you'll defend it like it's your life. He looked up at me, eyes sharp with recognition. It is my life, he said. It's how everyone sees me. I took a slow breath. Yeah, I said. And I know what it's like to be seen a certain way. But being seen isn't the same as being known. We sat there in silence for a while. Not romantic silence. Thinking silence. The kind of silence where you can hear your own fear. Before I left that night, Ethan said, "Can I get your number?" I hesitated. This was the moment where my boundary would either become real or become a speech I made once. I said, "You can. But I'm not doing late night only texting. If you message me, it can't be like I only exist when you're lonely." He nodded quickly. Okay, he said. Okay. I can do that. I gave him my number, then went home with my heart doing that dangerous thing where it imagines the best version of someone before they've earned it. On my bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to talk myself into calm. I reminded myself that one awkward porch conversation didn't mean I was suddenly safe. I reminded myself that people can be gentle in private and cruel in public. I reminded myself that I was not responsible for turning someone else into a better person. Ethan texted the next morning. Not at 2 a.m. Not with something vague. It was simple, "Hey. It's Ethan. I'm glad I talked to you last night. I'm still confused, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for bailing like that." I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back, "Thanks for saying that. Confused is okay. Just don't make your confusion my problem." His reply came a minute later, "That's fair. Over the next couple of weeks, we talked. Sometimes about normal things, classes, work, dumb videos. Sometimes about harder things. Ethan didn't suddenly become a philosopher. He still had its straight bro energy, still talked about sports like they were a form of religion, still wore hoodies like armor. But there was a tenderness under it that he seemed surprised by. He asked questions that were sometimes clumsy but not cruel. When he said something ignorant, he didn't double down to protect his ego. He listened. That mattered to me more than perfect language. The tension didn't come from whether he liked me. I could feel that he did. The tension came from what liking me threatened to change in his life. And the suspense, for me, wasn't about whether we would kiss or whatever people expect from a story like this. The suspense was about whether he would treat me ethically when his fear got loud. Because fear makes people selfish. It makes them bargain with your dignity as if it's optional. One afternoon we met for coffee off campus. I arrived early, nervous in a way that made my hands shake slightly around the cup. Online, I could curate myself. In person, I couldn't hide how much it mattered. When Ethan walked in, he spotted me and smiled so instinctively that it softened his whole face. Then he hesitated, scanning the room, and I saw him remember the social world outside this cafe. His shoulders tightened. He chose a table in the corner. I watched him choose the corner, and something in me cooled. Not anger, clarity. I didn't want to be a corner. When he sat, he started talking quickly, as if speed could cover discomfort. I let him talk for a few minutes, then I said, "Ethan." He stopped. "Yeah, I noticed you picked the corner." He blinked, confused for a second, then his cheeks reddened. "It's just quieter," he said, but it wasn't convincing. I stared at him until he looked away. Then I said calmly, "This is what I mean. I'm not doing this in a way where I'm always tucked away. I'm not asking you to announce anything to the room. I'm asking you not to treat being near me like something you need to hide." He swallowed hard. "I'm not hiding you." "It feels like you are," I said. "And feelings aren't proof, but they're data." He took a breath, then nodded. "Okay," he said, voice low. "Okay. I get it." "Do you?" I asked. He looked up at me, and his eyes were earnest in a way that made my chest ache. "I'm trying," he said. "I'm trying, but I feel like my whole brain is, like it's fighting me." I almost reached across the table then, almost defaulted into caretaker mode. But I didn't. I kept my hands around my cup and said, "I'm not your battle. I'm a person." He nodded again, slower. "You're right," he said. "You're right." That conversation didn't make everything smooth. It did something better, it established that I meant what I said. It taught him that my boundaries weren't poetry. They were requirements. Later, when he walked me to my car, he stood too close, then stepped back, then stepped close again, like proximity itself was a question. He finally said, Can I hug you?" The fact that he asked mattered. I said yes, and when he hugged me it wasn't possessive or performative. It was careful. Like he was learning, in real time, that gentleness was allowed. After that, the push-pull began in earnest. Some days Ethan was warm, texting me stupid updates, sending me memes, asking how my day was. Other days he went quiet. Not ghosting exactly, but distant, like he'd retreated into the part of himself that wanted the old script back. Those were the days my anxiety flared. The old fear whispered, "You're being tolerated, not chosen. You're a phase. You're a secret he's trying not to admit." I didn't want to become a person who policed someone else's pace. But I also didn't want to abandon myself. So I did something I'd avoided for years. I talked to a counselor at school. Not because I was broken, but because I needed somewhere to put the weight that wasn't Ethan's job to carry. In that office, I said out loud things I'd never said without a screen between me and the world. I talked about how I'd learned to anticipate ridicule. I talked about how I confused being wanted with being safe. I talked about the temptation to accept partial love just to avoid loneliness. The counselor didn't tell me what to do. They asked me questions that made me uncomfortable in the right way. What would respect look like here? What do you do when someone's internal conflict starts spilling onto you? How do you separate empathy from self-erasure? Those questions became my anchors. So when Ethan finally asked, one night over text, if we could keep things chill and private for a while, I didn't explode. I didn't plead. I didn't pretend it was fine. I said, I'm going to be direct. I like you. But I'm not doing private. If you want a friend, I can be a friend. If you want to date me, it has to be real. He didn't respond for a long time. Long enough for my stomach to twist. Long enough for me to think, here it is. The familiar ending. Then my phone buzzed. Can we talk in person? It said. We met at a park the next day, cold air and bare trees, the kind of day where everything looks honest because there's nothing blooming to distract you. Ethan looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. Like he'd been wrestling himself all night. He sat on a bench and stared at the ground. I don't understand what this means about me, he said, and his voice cracked a little on the last word. I stood in front of him, hands in my pockets to keep them from shaking. You already said that, I replied softly. So what's new? He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. What's new is I can't make it go away, he said. I tried to tell myself it's just curiosity, or just. I don't know, that I'm bored, that I'm lonely. But I'm not bored. And I'm not lonely. I'm just, he swallowed. I like you. He said it the way someone admits they're lost. No pride. No swagger. Just truth, raw and terrifying. My heart thudded. I felt tenderness for him, but I also felt the edge of my boundary, sharp and necessary. Okay, I said. And what are you going to do with that? He blinked, caught. I don't know. I sat beside him, leaving space. Ethan, I said, I'm not going to punish you for being confused. But I'm not going to disappear so you can feel straight in public. His face tightened. I'm not trying to. I know, I said. But impact matters. If you date me, you're dating a guy who presents feminine. People will have opinions. Some of those opinions will be stupid. Some will be cruel. You can't control them. The only thing you can control is whether you make their comfort more important than my dignity. He stared at the ground again, breathing hard. Then he said something that shifted the whole conversation. I think I've been using a straight like armor, he whispered. Like if I say it enough, nothing can touch me. I didn't speak. I let him keep going. He rubbed his face with both hands. My whole life, being straight wasn't just who I date. It was like a badge. It meant I was normal. It meant I was safe. It meant nobody could question me. And the second I liked you, it felt like betrayal. Like I was betraying the version of me everyone agreed to. I felt a lump rise in my throat, because I recognized that feeling too, even though the specifics were different. The fear of losing the protection of expectation. The fear of becoming a question mark in other people's minds. He looked at me, eyes wide with something like grief. But I don't think it's betrayal, he said. I think it's just me. And I don't know who that is yet. That was the twist, if there was one, not that Ethan was secretly something all along in a dramatic reveal, but that he was finally seeing how labels can be less about truth and more about defense. He wasn't confessing a hidden identity so much as confessing that his certainty had been a shield. I said, you don't have to figure out a label today. He let out a shaky breath. But, I continued, you do have to decide how you're going to treat me. He nodded slowly. I want to treat you right. Wanting isn't the same as doing, I said, not harsh, just honest. He swallowed, then said, okay. Then I'll do it. He stopped, like the next sentence was a cliff. I'll ask you out. For real. In public. My stomach flipped. Part of me wanted to believe him immediately. Part of me wanted to protect myself by doubting. I'd learned that hope can be dangerous if it's not paired with realism. So I asked, "What does in public mean to you?" He frowned, thinking. "It means, not at midnight. Not in your apartment only. Not pretending you're just someone I know. It means taking you out. It means my friends seeing us together. It means if someone asks, I don't lie." My throat tightened. "And if someone makes a joke?" He flinched. Then he said, "Then I tell them to stop." "And if they don't?" He stared ahead, jaw clenched. "Then I leave," he said, and the words sounded like they cost him something. I don't want to be the guy who lets people disrespect someone he cares about. I sat with that. Not because I needed perfection, but because I needed evidence of responsibility. I said, "If you do this, it's going to be hard sometimes." "I know," he said, and then he gave a small, miserable laugh. I thought I knew what hard was. I thought hard was losing a game. Or getting injured. This is a different hard. I nodded. "Yeah." He looked at me carefully. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "Why are you so steady?" he asked. "Like you're scared, but you're not begging me." The question hit me because it revealed the kind of relationship patterns he'd probably seen, people bargaining for love like it's scarce. I said, "Because I've begged before," I admitted. "Not to you. But to other situations. To my own life. I've made myself smaller so other people wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. And I don't want to live like that anymore. Dating men is new for me, but self-respect can't be new. It has to be the foundation." He stared at me like he was memorizing the sentence. A few days later, Ethan followed through. Not perfectly, not like a movie, but in a way that felt real. He texted me, "Want to grab dinner Friday? There's a place near campus." And then, as if to prove a point to himself, he added, "Not a secret." I said yes, and then I spent the next 2 days trying not to panic. Because being publicly chosen is its own kind of vulnerability. When you've been hidden, even by yourself, being seen can feel like standing on a stage under bright lights. I picked an outfit that felt like me, soft, clean lines, subtle makeup. I wasn't trying to look like a girl. I wasn't trying to look like a stereotype. I was trying to look like Kai, the version of me who had survived the years of fear and deserved to exist without apology. When I arrived at the restaurant, Ethan was already there, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. He saw me and smiled, and the smile was immediate. Then his eyes flicked around the sidewalk, checking for familiar faces, and I felt my heart drop. But then I watched him do something small and monumental. He stopped scanning. He exhaled. He stepped toward me. "Hey," he said, voice steadying. "Hey," I replied, and I searched his face for signs of regret. I saw nerves, yes. But not regret. He held the door open for me, and inside, the host asked, "Table for two?" Ethan answered, "Yeah," without hesitation. Then he glanced at me as if to say, "See? I'm doing it." We sat near the window. People walked past outside, and every time the bell above the door chimed, Ethan's shoulders twitched slightly. He was afraid. I could feel it. And I realized something important: courage isn't a personality trait. It's a behavior. It's something you do while afraid. Halfway through dinner, 2 guys walked in, guys Ethan clearly knew. I watched Ethan freeze for a fraction of a second, and I felt my own body tense, ready for impact. The guys spotted him, grinned, and came over. "Yo, Ethan," one of them said. Then his eyes landed on me, and his grin faltered into confusion. The other guy's expression did the quick mental math people do when they're trying to categorize what they're seeing. Ethan's jaw tightened. I waited. I didn't intervene. This was the moment where Ethan's promises would either become real or become something he only said in safe conversations. "Hey," Ethan said to them, voice firm. "This is Kai. We're on a date." The words landed like a weight in the air. On a date. Not hanging out. Not chatting. Not a joke. One of the guys blinked. "Oh," he said, and his tone was uncertain. Cool, man." The other guy forced a laugh that didn't quite work. "Didn't know you," he started, then stopped, as if he couldn't find a socially acceptable sentence. Ethan didn't fill the gap with a lie. He just said, "Yeah, now you do." There was a long, awkward pause. The guys exchanged looks. Finally the first one shrugged, trying to salvage normalcy. "All right," he said. "Well. Have fun." And they left, retreating to another table. Ethan's hands were shaking slightly when he picked up his glass. He noticed me noticing, and his eyes flickered with embarrassment. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He exhaled hard. "I feel like I just jumped off something," he admitted. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "That's what it feels like." He stared at the table for a moment, then looked up at me. "I didn't die," he said, half joking, half amazed. "No," I said. "You didn't." Something softened in his face then, not just attraction, respect. And I realized I was feeling something too, not just relief, but a kind of healing I hadn't expected. Because my first time dating men wasn't turning into a story where I had to accept conditions to be loved. It was becoming a story where someone was learning, in real time, to choose me without bargaining away my visibility. That night, when we walked outside, the air was cold enough to sting. Ethan hovered beside me, not touching, like he was still learning what he was allowed to want. He finally said, "Can I hold your hand?" I looked at him. In the streetlight, he looked terrified and determined at the same time. "Yes," I said. He took my hand, and his grip was warm and slightly clumsy, as if his body had practiced confidence but not this particular kind of bravery. We walked like that past windows and passing cars, ordinary and extraordinary at once. And I felt something settle in my chest, not a happily ever after fantasy, but a grounded truth: I could be afraid and still refuse to live in hiding. Ethan didn't become a perfect person overnight. He still had days where he spiraled about what it meant. He still stumbled over language sometimes. He still had to unlearn the reflex to treat masculinity like a performance he'd fail if he showed tenderness. But the difference was, he stopped making those struggles my burden. When he needed to process, he said so without disappearing. When he felt defensive, he named it instead of lashing out. When someone said something disrespectful, he didn't laugh along to keep social peace. He learned to tolerate other people's discomfort rather than sacrificing my dignity to soothe it. And I changed too. I stopped equating love with anxiety. I stopped treating crumbs like a feast. I learned that boundaries aren't punishments, they're instructions for how to treat me if you want access to my life. I learned that empathy doesn't require self-abandonment. I learned that it's possible to care about someone's journey without becoming the road they walk on. The most surprising part of all this wasn't that I found someone who could be gentle. It was that I became someone who could insist on gentleness without apologizing for needing it. For years, I thought my softness made me less safe in the world. Now I understand something different: softness, when paired with self-respect, is not weakness. It's clarity. It's knowing what kind of love is worth accepting. There's a moment I return to sometimes, not because it's cinematic, but because it's simple. A few weeks after that dinner, Ethan and I were walking across campus in the afternoon, people everywhere, sunlight too bright to hide in. We passed a group of guys who looked like the kind I used to fear, and one of them glanced at us and smirked. I felt my body brace, old instincts flaring. Ethan didn't squeeze my hand to reassure me. He didn't perform toughness. He just kept walking, head up, hand steady, as if to say, "I'm not negotiating your humanity with strangers." And in that quiet steadiness, I felt something in me integrate, the online confidence and the in-person fear finally meeting in the middle and agreeing to coexist. I didn't become fearless. I became whole enough to keep going while afraid. If you're listening to this and you're somewhere earlier in the story, still hiding parts of yourself, still trying to make your feelings fit into a box that doesn't match your shape, I want you to know something practical, not inspirational. You don't have to figure everything out at once. You don't have to earn the right to be treated with respect. You can take your time with labels, but you can be firm with boundaries. You can have compassion for people who are learning without volunteering to be their secret. And if someone tells you they care about you but only in ways that keep them comfortable, you are allowed to call that what it is, a condition, not a commitment. Ethan once told me he thought being straight was something he had to protect like a reputation. I told him being yourself isn't a reputation project. It's a responsibility. It requires honesty, and honesty has consequences. But the consequences of living dishonestly are quieter and longer lasting. They show up as anxiety, self-contempt, and relationships built on partial truth. Choosing courage over comfort doesn't guarantee an easy life, but it gives you a life you can actually inhabit. And for me, that's what all of this was really about, inhabiting my own life. Not as a spectacle. Not as a secret. Just as a person learning, slowly, to stop treating himself like a problem. Thank you for watching and spending this time with me. If this story helped you understand yourself or others a little better, feel free to explore more on the channel.